Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're just bringing everybody in now. While we bring everyone in, why don't you tell us where you're joining us from in the chat? I'm from Southwick, Massachusetts. I'm from Connecticut. Glastonbury. Hi, Dan. Oh, we're coming from all over. Let's see. Bridgeport, Cheshire, Milford, Durham, New Hampshire, New Milford, Groton. Good to see everybody. All right, well, we will start. We've got some more people coming. We're expecting almost 180 people to be joining us today, and we're super excited that everybody is very interested in this topic, which we think is very important. Welcome. I'm Joyce Leiz. I'm Executive Director of Connecticut Audubon Society, and I'm pleased to be greeting you for Connecticut Audubon Society's launch of our 19th State of the Birds report, which is titled The Next Conservation Frontier, Protecting Birds from Insecticides. First, I'll just go through some of the housekeeping items. We are recording this presentation. We have it set so that you won't be on camera for the recordings, but if you want to be off camera, you can turn your camera off. You will be muted throughout the presentation. We are taking questions through the chat. For your best view, we recommend using the view that's the speaker view, because that has a great viewing experience. And all questions, as I said, are in the chat. I am pleased to be joined today by our authors of this publication. We've been working closely with our partners at the Connecticut Coalition for Pesticide Reform, and several of our members are joining us today. And I really want to thank them for all of their dedication on this topic over quite a while, but at least the past 3 years of the work that we've been doing on legislative work to get a bill passed. We're really trying to get a stronger law passed in the state of Connecticut, and we've heard your concerns, and we know that this is important to you. So we are standing strong, we are standing with you, and we are going to work very hard to make sure that we get this legislation passed. The 2025 session might be our best chance to make this happen. The goal of this 2024 Connecticut State of the Birds report is to build support among the public and to convince public officials that the time to act is now. Our lessons from DDT are that if we wait to identify the problem and then wait to fix it, there are birds that come to the point of extinction. We know that there's been a major decline of songbirds over the past 50 years. And in part, insecticides plays a role in this. So we really want to make sure that we take a more proactive stance on this, and we don't wait until the birds are at the point of complete extinction. We definitely don't want to wake up in 15 or 20 years and say, we knew this was coming and we didn't do anything. The cost-effective solution and the right thing to do is to prevent the birds from becoming uncommon now and not waiting until the situation is critical. We will hear this morning from 4 of our report's authors. And then Miley Bull, our Senior Director of Science and Conservation, will talk about bird population declines in Connecticut and the implication that neonics has played. And then I'll review our recommendations. We'll wrap up with your questions. So again, please enter those in the chat. Right now, I'm pleased to invite Tom Andersen, our Director of Communications and the editor of this year's State of the Birds report and most of our State of the Birds reports, to introduce today's presenters. Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce. First, let me offer a quick and sincere thank you to Chuck Watson, who's sort of the forgotten man on this project. Chuck's been volunteering for years as State of the Birds copy editor, and he's absolutely essential. I know Chuck signed up for this. I don't know if he's logged on yet, but thank you, Chuck. I truly appreciate all your help. So when we were planning this report, we saw the opportunity to have an almost immediate effect on an important problem. We boiled it down to 4 main topics, which is what you'll hear about today from the authors of the report's articles. The effects of neonics on birds, which Hardy Kern of American Bird Conservancy wrote about, and basically why neonics and why now, which is the report we titled The Dangers of a Potent Pesticide Used on an Unprecedented Scale. Dan Raichel of the Natural Resources Defense Council wrote that article. How Neonics Are Affecting Insects and Other Invertebrates by Emily May of the Xerces Society. What is the status and the plan for the immediate future by Bill Hobbs. Bill's a journalist from southeastern Connecticut. Bill's also been involved as a volunteer with the Connecticut Pesticide Reform Coalition, which, as Joyce mentioned, Connecticut Audubon is part of, and which really deserves a lot of the credit for pushing this problem and the solutions to the forefront. Each of those authors will make a short presentation. Then we'll turn to Miley Bull, Connecticut Audubon Senior Director of Science and Conservation, who we wanted to make sure throughout the report that we focused on birds. For many of us, the years of recovering from DDT aren't ancient history, they're the recent past. We remember when it was rare to see an osprey in Connecticut, and we don't want to wake up again. Joyce just said this, but I'm going to reiterate it because it's important. We don't really want to wake up in 15 to 20 years and realize that robins and bluebirds and barn swallows are almost gone. So we picked 6 common birds to tie the report together and asked 6 authors to write about them. 2 of those authors, coincidentally, have appeared in our Young, Gifted, and Wild About Birds series. Allison Black of the Connecticut Ornithological Association, and Murray Burgess, who's now a professor at Mississippi State University. The other authors of those bird articles were Pamela Hunt of New Hampshire Audubon, and 3 of our own experts, Andy Griswold, Ken Elkins, and Miley Bull. So Miley will bring that all together. He'll talk about and summarize the threats to the state's common birds. And then, as Joyce said, we'll go back to her for the recommendations, and we'll close with question and answers. And so now I think we're going to bring on the 4 main authors and speakers, and we'll let them introduce themselves quickly.
Good morning, everyone. Hi, my name's Emily May. I'm the Agricultural Conservation Lead with the Pesticide Program at the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation. My background is in entomology. I studied wild bees for my master's degree and habitat restoration. And my work with Xerces focuses on conserving pollinators and other beneficial insects by creating habitat and reducing the impacts of pesticide use. So over the last decade, I've worked with farmers and conservation groups and policymakers to help ensure a better future for insects and all of the life that depends on them, including in Connecticut, where I lived for 5 years before moving back to Vermont.
Sorry, good morning, everyone. My name is Hardy Kern, he, him. I am Director of Government Relations for American Bird Conservancy, and I also direct our Pesticides and Birds campaign. I'm based in Columbus, Ohio, but I have the great pleasure of being able to work at the federal and the state level across the country to try to find creative policy, legislative, and sometimes even direct solutions to lowering the threat of toxic pesticides to birds. And as you can imagine, that is a big job, which is why it's so fantastic that there are amazing coalitions, amazing groups, and really amazing Audubon chapters like Connecticut Audubon that are dedicated to this cause. I have an undergraduate degree in zoology from the Ohio State University. Yes, I said the Ohio State. I'm one of those guys. And I have a master's in public administration from Kent State University. I'm a very avid native plant gardener on the side, and I'm also a licensed wildlife rehabilitator as well. So very, very happy to be here. And I'm a huge birder, obviously.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dan Raichel. I'm the director of NRDC's Pollinators and Pesticides Initiative, which works to protect pollinators, including birds, from threats to their continued existence, especially the use of pollinator toxic pesticides like neonics, which we'll be talking about today. I'm an attorney by training, and I am based in Chicago. And Bill, I'll pass it to you.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Good morning. I'm Bill Hobbs. I'm a contributing writer for Estuary Magazine and also the Times newspapers in New London, Connecticut. My specialty is profiling wildlife, like fishers, bobcats, coyotes, black bears, etc., and also writing about environmental issues. I hail from Stonington, Connecticut.
That's great. So now we'll start with Hardy, and we'll switch to our PowerPoint as well. Yeah, this is good. This is a good opportunity to thank WSHU Public Radio, which is sponsors this year's report, sponsored last year's report as well. We're happy that they're involved, and it's great fun working with them. So thank you to WSHU Public Radio. So Hardy, take it away.
Thank you so much, Tom. And like I said, everyone, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today and really to be part of this report. Like I said, I have the great pleasure of being able to be involved in work like this in a lot of different parts of the country. Connecticut so far has been far and away my favorite place to do this type of work, not only because of the robust scientific prowess of Connecticut Audubon and all of the community work that you do, but because of the continued dedication of your supporters and of Connecticut Audubon staff and all of the wonderful coalition partners we have to actually making a change and making a difference. It's an absolute pleasure to be here today. And we've even been lucky enough to have Joyce come down and help us out on Capitol Hill, bringing these issues up to the level of national attention. So this is really exciting to be here today. And what I'm going to kick us off and starting about is how neonicotinoid pesticides, or neonics, are impacting birds in meadows, marshes, yards, golf courses, all of these different parts of the state and all of these different parts of bird life. About, goodness, 5 years ago now, there was a report that was released titled Decline of the North American Avifauna. And in that report, there was a very, very stark realization that North America is down about 25% of its birds or so. We are 3 billion birds below where we are supposed to be in North America. And the groups of birds that are most directly impacted, I guess the biggest impact is being felt on them, are grassland birds and aerial insectivores, birds that fly around and eat bugs, and birds that mostly rely on prairie ecosystems, grassland ecosystems, birds that need a lot of open area with some trees along the side of it. And when you start looking into the causes of bird declines, there are a lot of different things that we can point at. There's outdoor cats on occasion, there might be window collision, habitat loss, but one thing that consistently comes up is the impact of pesticides on birds. The best estimates we have are that somewhere between 65 and 72 million birds per year are killed by pesticides. This comes from two different reports, one of which was commissioned by the United States Forest Service to try to understand how chemical use might impact birds. But like this first bullet says, it doesn't tell the whole story. This is only the deaths of birds directly from being exposed to chemical pesticides. What it leaves out are what happens when those same chemicals get into waterways and deplete insect resources, when those chemicals might drift somewhere else and land on pollinating insects and then decrease habitat over time. What about when there are chemicals that might not cause direct lethality to birds, but might cause sublethal impacts? There might be other ways that these chemicals are having negative impacts on birds. And that's really why my program at ABC was launched, with a particular emphasis on neonics. Not only can neonicotinoids, oh, I'm so sorry, Sally. Yes, I am at a coffee shop, so I apologize for the ambient noise. If it gets to be too overwhelming, let me know and I'll try to find somewhere a little bit quieter, but I'll speak louder in the meantime. When you think about neonicotinoid pesticides, neonicotinoid insecticides, they are designed to be very highly toxic in very small amounts. So much so that the amount of neonic that fits on the outside of one single kernel of corn, one single corn seed, that is enough to kill something the size of a blue jay or a red-winged blackbird. But let's say that a bird gets exposed to a little bit less than that amount, that can cause them to not be able to navigate, so it'll delay migration. They can experience life-threatening weight loss. Female birds can experience reduced brood sizes. Male birds can actually experience decreased spermatogenesis. So it makes it so much harder for them to be able to reproduce. So not only might we see, birds knocked out from immediate exposure, but when you have fewer eggs laid over time, that's going to have population level impacts. The biggest one, though, that I think we need to focus on with neonics is that they're insecticides. They do their job very well. They kill insects. And when that happens on the fields they're targeting, that's the goal. But what usually happens is these same chemicals on the fields that they're used in can impact the beneficial insects, the pollinating insects, the predatory beetles and wasps that might be walking around on those same fields. They also wash off and get into waterways where they start to impact mayflies, caddisflies, other aquatic insects that a lot of birds rely on. And this last statistic that you can see at the bottom here, This is where I think we're seeing the biggest impacts from neonics on birds. Yes, it's terrible when there's direct impacts on them from ingesting them or being sprayed with them, but almost 100% of birds in North America rely on insects at some point in their life cycle. Our favorite backyard feeder birds like robins, or well, robins aren't so much feeder birds, I guess, but things like finches, things like sparrows, things like wrens, they will eat a lot of caterpillars and other flying insects to feed their chicks. Even hummingbirds, which we think of as nectar eaters, they mostly rear their chicks on baby spiders and small beetles. So even they need all the creepy crawlies that we find in our backyard. And when we have these highly potent insecticides leaving the areas where they're being applied, which might be our yards, this could be golf courses, this could be farm fields, impacting insects that they're not supposed to be interacting with, they keep doing their job. They keep killing bugs. And that means way less available food for birds, which is going to have impacts over time. And that's why I like to think of neonics as kind of the 1-2 punch for birds. Not only is it bad when they're directly ingested, but when they start to impact the really important food sources for birds like bugs, that means that we're going to have even more generational impacts over time. So we go into much more detail in the report. I don't want to talk too much right now, other than to say we're going to hear a lot of fantastic information today. We're going to hear a lot of reasons why we need to do something about these chemicals in order to steward and care for and conserve the birds that we love. But the amazing thing is that your Connecticut Audubon Society has a very well thought out, very detailed action plan to reverse these declines. We are so excited to be part of this effort. We are excited to make a difference. We are excited to finally get neonics out of our environments and really help the birds. So with that, I will pass it back to Tom, and I'm excited to take questions in a little bit.
Thank you, Hardy, very much. The feeling, by the way, is mutual. We are thrilled to be able to work with American Bird Conservancy. So now, Dan Raichel, Natural Resources Defense Council. Take it away, Dan.
Well, yeah, and thank you all, too, for having us today. We feel really honored to participate in that and really excited for what Connecticut may be able to do in the future. It feels like, as Joyce said, 2025 could be the year here. But I want to sort of build on what Hardy was talking about and explain and provide a little context as to why we think neonics are some of the most ecologically destructive pesticides we've seen since DDT. For birds, but also for pollinators, wildlife in general, clean water, human health, you name it. There's a lot of pesticides out there, right, in the environment. Why are we so concerned about this one particular class? And I think there are three big reasons. The first, and we can move on to the next slide. The first is that neonics are super duper toxic to insect life. To give you a sense of scale here, the thin neonic coating on just one corn seed, and I'll explain that in a second, has enough active ingredient to kill about 250,000 bees. The treatment of just 1 square foot of lawn has enough active ingredient to kill about 1 million bees. They are among the most potent insecticides ever created. As Hardy said, they're very good at doing their job. And in fact, since they were introduced, they've made U.S. agriculture about 50 times more harmful to insect life. The second issue with neonics is sort of the novel way in which they work, or it was at least novel when they were introduced about 25 years ago. The idea is that neonics permeate plants. They get into the leaves, the roots, the pollen, the nectar, the fruit. They essentially make the plant itself toxic. They make the plant itself the pesticide, which means they can be applied in all sorts of new ways. Of course, they can be sprayed, and they are, but more commonly they're applied to soil, as they are in lawn and garden settings, or they're literally painted on crop seeds. The problem, and the idea with painting it on the crop seed is as that crop plant is growing, it literally soaks up the coating through its roots and becomes toxic. The problem is only 2 to 5% make it into that target plant. The other 95+% stay in the environment, and it's sort of similar for turf. And they persist in soils for year after year after year. And the properties that let them get soaked up into those plants, namely they dissolve really readily in water, means that anytime it rains, anytime you water your lawn, anytime there's irrigation of a crop field, Those neonics are moving through the environment. They're contaminating new soil. If there's wild plants in that soil, they become toxic, their pollen, their nectar. If there's a water supply nearby, that water supply becomes polluted. And then the third issue with neonics is they are used all over the place. Virtually all corn seed in the US, conventional corn, is pre-treated with a neonic before planting. Half or more of soybean seeds, and they're also all over all other farm applications, lawns, gardens, golf courses, pet products, bed bug products, you name it. These things are everywhere. They are perhaps the most widely deployed insecticides in US history. And what's happening is they're being used in the same place year after year after year. They're persisting in soils for years. So what you get is this buildup of toxicity in the soil, this sort of toxic battery that is constantly expanding every time it rains to get into every nook and cranny of the environment, soil, water, plant life, wildlife, etc. And that's sort of the nature of the problem. So as Hardy alluded to, this is just hollowing out our ecosystems from the bottom up. And that's a big deal, not just for those insects and pollinating insects, but it's a big deal for birds. And it's a big deal for fish too in aquatic ecosystems. So we see those ripple effects through the environment. We see studies linking neonic use to the loss of birds and bird biodiversity, particularly those insect-eating and grassland birds. And we also see, rising levels of neonics in people's body too, in our water supplies. I won't get into it in detail at this point, but we know that conventional water systems don't remove neonics from contaminated water sources. And again, we're seeing more neonics in people's bodies. As with birds, neonics are also toxic to people, and there's growing concerns about their impacts on our health, particularly that of children. So, a lot of countries around the world have taken action on neonics, either banning or restricting them. But in the United States, the EPA has largely been asleep at the wheel, really leaving it up to the states to take action. Connecticut was in the vanguard of states that did so. In 2016, it passed the Pollinator Protection Act, which limited neonic use to licensed applicators and also limited other sorts of uses. But by and large, there's still a lot of neonic use going on in Connecticut because any lawn care specialist, any pest control specialist is going to have that license, right? So there's still a lot of neonics being used. And in the past, 8 years or so, other states and jurisdictions have leapfrogged Connecticut, have passed restrictions on sort of what we call, dumb uses of neonics, the very high cost, high harm, but no to low benefit uses, right? The uses that that aren't providing benefits to users or are easily replaced with safer alternatives. New York just did so. Vermont just did so. Quebec has done so. We're hoping that Connecticut once again joins the vanguard of jurisdictions that are taking action against this really important problem. And it's like Joyce said, we don't want to be 15 years down the road thinking about what we could have done. There's the ability to take action right now, and we hope Connecticut does so.
Dan, thank you very much. That was really terrific. So Emily May, there's Emily. Hi, Emily. Thank you.
Hey there. Thank you so much. I am here to expand on what Dan and Hardy talked about, to talk about the ripple effect of how neonics threaten ecosystems, especially the risks posed to invertebrates and all of the life that they support. As both Hardy and Dan mentioned, neonics were designed to be incredibly toxic to insects, and they really succeed at that. They affect not only what we would consider a target pest, but they also affect many beneficial invertebrates in soil and water, as well as pollinators like bees, which are crucial for food systems and are particularly vulnerable to the impacts of these chemicals. So you may have heard, if you follow sort of agricultural discussion, that the total use of insecticides has declined over the last 30 years by weight. But actually, pollinators face greater challenges from pesticides than they did 30 years ago, because even though the total use by weight has declined, the toxic load in the environment for insects has increased exponentially over the last 30 years. And that's a trend that is largely driven by neonics, which are just highly toxic to bees at vanishingly small doses. So you've already heard about how much is on the seed coating of a single seed. And the reason that that can kill so many bees with just a very, very small dose is that a lethal dose for a honeybee of the neonics that end up on a seed coating is 15,000 times smaller than a grain of salt. It's only 4 nanograms of one of those 2 key insecticides. So the impact of these is extending much further than just pollinators. Soil invertebrates, aquatic invertebrates, and other organisms that form the foundation of food webs are also at risk. So this widespread use, this widespread broad spectrum toxicity means that neonics aren't just a bee problem. They're an ecosystem problem, they're a bird problem, they're a fish problem. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about what we know about here in Connecticut, where we're seeing contamination from some of these chemicals. So there was work done by researchers at the Connecticut Ag Experiment Station that looked at honeybee collected pollen from 5 sites across different landscapes, urban and rural, agricultural, and looked at that pollen for pesticide residues. They found 60 different pesticides in the pollen collected by these bees. And the neonic insecticide imidacloprid was found in the pollen at all 5 sites that they collected from. And it was also the pesticide that was most frequently found at levels that were hazardous to bees. So this was one demonstration of how common these chemicals were in the environment and how often bees are exposed to them. But this isn't just a pollinator problem, because neonics, as Dan explained really well, are highly mobile, systemic, water-soluble chemicals, meaning it's very easy for them to wash off from where they're applied into streams and rivers. Over the last 20 years or so, water sampling in Connecticut rivers has found imidacloprid. Again, this is a neonic. It's commonly used on turf grass. It has been consistently detected at levels exceeding the benchmarks that EPA sets, the Environmental Protection Agency sets, for chronic impacts to aquatic life. So when pesticides like imidacloprid exceed these levels, especially on a regular basis, it poses a serious threat to aquatic insects, which are important food sources for birds and for fish and other animals. Neonics, like many other chemicals, tend to be more lethal when insects are exposed over long periods of time. So at low concentrations, insects are more sensitive to these chemicals when they're exposed over a long period of time. There's a mayfly that was found to be 800 times more sensitive to imidacloprid when exposed for a month than when it was exposed for only a couple days. So when we see these detected in rivers every month, you can expect that these insects are being exposed to that over very long periods of time. In Japan, there was actually collapses of a couple of commercial fisheries due to increased use of neonics in agriculture. So that's a story you can look at for impacts to these ecosystems. On land, neonics also can disrupt soil invertebrates. So the things that are helping us build healthy soils, ensuring ecosystem health, ensuring consistent food production, the insects that break down organic matter, that aerate soil, that eat pest insects and weed seeds. These are things like earthworms, ground beetles, nematodes, springtails, and more. And one of the most concerning characteristics of neonics, other than just their toxicity, is how long they persist in the environment. Imidacloprid can remain in soil or water for months, and sometimes even years under the right conditions after when it is applied. So this persistence means that even if we stopped using all neonics today, they would continue to pose a threat to invertebrates and food webs for months to years to come. And we've seen this a little bit already. So Dan talked about how Connecticut took action in 2016 to pass legislation classifying neonics as restricted use, which just means it limits their application to certified professionals and removes them from retail sales. And so we've only just begun in the last year or two to see some of the minor reductions in surface water that are likely a result of that legislation, pulling neonics off of retail shelves for consumer use. But significant neonic use is continuing on lawns and golf courses, ornamental plants, row crops, and more by certified applicators. And we continue to see those detections in our rivers that are posing real threats. I will just echo everything that's already been said. The evidence is really clear on these insecticides. Neonics continue to harm invertebrate communities and all of the life that depends on those communities, both on land and in water. And the story really doesn't have to end with that 2016 legislation. It's time again to act and to adopt better science-based regulations, increase awareness, and encourage more sustainable practices and alternatives to reduce these risks and to protect our resources. In order to ensure that kind of healthy future for our rivers, for our food systems, for our bees and birds, it is time to take action. And we hope to see that in Connecticut. So thanks very much for having me here to talk about this.
Emily, thank you. Can I ask you a quick question that I had not prepared you for?
Yes.
The name Xerces, what does it mean? Where does it come from?
So we are named for the Xerces blue butterfly, which is the first butterfly species known to go extinct through human activities in North America. In the San Francisco area, the species was lost. It had a limited range, and we developed San Francisco right over it.
I didn't know that. Thank you. Very interesting. Okay. So now, Bill Hobbs.
I just want to say, wow, the neonics evidence is becoming frightening. I took a different direction with this story. This is a story about the Connecticut Coalition for Pesticide Reform, or CPR for short, which is a group of accomplished professionals who care about the environment and want to help draft legislation that, if passed, will ban the non-agricultural use of neonics. We tried to answer 3 questions in this article. 1, what will the coalition be asking the General Assembly in 2025? We don't know all the details, but the general goal is to pass a law that gets neonics out of the environment and helps the birds, bees, and people. 2, why is this legislation important? During the last 50 years, as you all know, these harmful chemicals have been linked to slowly wiping out insects, wreaking havoc with birds, tainting our drinking water, and getting into the human food supply. That alone is pretty scary. And number 3, why do we need to pursue the legislation? Because the last 2 years, 2 Senate bills have failed, and further action is definitely imperative. Here's a quick review of the legislative history in Connecticut, and I know some of my colleagues have touched on this. In 2016, that starts the ball rolling. Connecticut helped lead the way nationally, in fact, passing the Pollinator Protection Act, which classified neonics as restricted use. And as already has been said, this means these products could not be purchased in retail stores. Only certified applicators were allowed to buy and use them. Then in 1922, Connecticut legislators passed Senate Bill 120, banning, and forgive me, I'm not an expert here, but some of the names of these chemicals are really difficult to say, but they banned chlorpyrifos. Did I get that correct? It's a neurotoxin. Okay, thank you. It's a neurotoxin pesticide used to control golf course foliage and some soil-borne insects. But the next 2 bills had some trouble, as I mentioned. Senate Bill 963 in 2023 passed out of committee, but didn't get called for a vote in the Senate, while Senate Bill 190 in 2024 never made it out of the committee, nor it never even got to the Senate. Both bills received huge pushback from chemical companies like Bayer and Syngenta. These are major manufacturers of some of these neonics, and also by golf course owner-operator. Meanwhile, as it's already been mentioned, Vermont, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island passed legislation prohibiting retail sales of neonics, allowing only licensed applicators to use the products. Vermont banned most neonic coated seeds. New Jersey passed a bill banning neonics use on lawns and turf grass by homeowners and professionals. Maine barred neonics from residential use, and New York banned not only the use of neonics on ornamental plants and turf grass, but the sale or purchase of neonic-treated corn and soybean seeds. And I'm told fairly recently that, yes, much of this is passed, but it's not active until 2029. Many parts of Canada and Europe have also citing harm to bees. So in a perfect world, CPR is hopeful the 2025 General Assembly will ban neonicotinoids, but they want to be very careful with the language in the bill. Last week, I attended a CPR meeting. It was a Zoom meeting. And this time they said they are not trying to ban the use of neonics on lawns and gardens or ban the use of certain coated seeds. Instead, CPR wants to take advantage of a statute that's already on the books requiring a permit to use for the harmful chemicals. And this means, let's say you're a landscape company. You have to prove a need. You have to show there's a pest and show there are not any less harmful treatments available. The noose is tightening by this method. CPR is actively seeking the help of DEEP and the State Department of Agriculture. And the thinking is maybe the vetting or the permitting process can go to DEEP to review and give a thumbs up or a thumb down, and the Department of Ag can issue the permit. Lastly, CPR is actively gathering scientific data, and in the meeting last week, they mentioned that two professors, one is retired, but two professors from UConn are helping CPR boil down and summarize a U.S. Geological Survey report that took a look. It was a survey that took a look at the Norwalk River. And I think Louise Washer, I know you're on this. Louise is head of the CPR, but I think they took samples from 16 different locations on the Norwalk River and found a high dosage of imidacloprid. So these two professors are helping write this new UConn report that shows high and rising levels of neonics in some of the Connecticut rivers. Peer-reviewed studies, USGS and EPA all confirm that neonics devastate insect populations, birds, and listed species, and can be harmful to human health. So the CPR group is thinking that, okay, if we can get UConn to step in here, that'll add a good heavy weight to our lobbying effort. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Bill, thank you very much. That was terrific. Thanks for being so involved in CPR too over the most recent months. So the next slide, before we bring on Miley, this is just very quickly give you some information. It's nobody really knows how much or how many or to what extent neonics are being used in Connecticut. The state collects the information, but the information is not readily available. It's hard to use. It's hard to get access to, and it's hard to organize. But we know from the University of Connecticut that there are about 300,000 acres of turf grass in the state. That includes golf courses and lawns. We also know that, or rather I made my own estimate, that there are between 8,500 and 25,500 acres of golf courses in the state. And we know from the US Department of Agriculture that there are about 24,000 acres of corn planted in the state. So those are likely to be the places where neonics are most heavily used in Connecticut. So now Miley Bull is going to talk about neonics and Connecticut's birds. Miley, take it away. Thank you very much.
Thanks. This is a great presentation so far. I really appreciate everybody coming on. This is such an important issue. Let's go back. I just lost my... Okay, so let's go back to the basic premise here. A study in the Journal of Science has indicated that in the last, since 1970, we've lost probably about 3 billion breeding birds. So think about that. That means almost a third of our bird population has been lost in a single human lifetime. I mean, that is an amazing issue. Now, there's lots of reasons why birds have declined, from habitat degradation to feral cats to window kills, et cetera. But it appears that pesticides are becoming a more and more important reason for our losses. Now, how does that affect, how is that affecting our Connecticut birds? We don't see dead birds on our lawns and playgrounds from pesticides. I think we've indicated before that although we have seed-eating birds such as red-winged blackbirds, et cetera, most of these birds are picking up insects, which are being impacted by the pesticides. So as we mentioned, a single seed treated with neonics can kill a songbird. But small amounts of neonics can cause birds to lose weight, reduce reproduction, delay migration, or even lose their course. And most importantly, it reduces the food supply by killing non-target insects that all require food. Most of our birds feed on insects at some portion of their lives, right? And so by reducing our insect population, we're reducing our bird population. And as we mentioned, neonics are absorbed by plant tissues and are expressed in all parts of the plants, including leaves, nectar, and pollen. Some of our birds, for instance, migrants and resident birds like bobolinks, they feed heavily on insects. They feed, not only do they eat the insects themselves, they feed them to their young. So already bobolinks are endangered breeding birds in Connecticut. Now, how about American robins? So robins are feeding, we see robins feeding, of course, in the wintertime on berries, but in the spring and summer, they're feeding on largely on earthworms and other invertebrates that they're pulling off a lawn. So if your landscaper, if you have a landscaper, is putting neonics on your lawn, it's leaking into the system. It's affecting the invertebrates that robins are feeding on. Now, we haven't noticed a huge population crash in robins. Robins are one of our most abundant species, but we might not notice that until it's almost too late to do something about it. So what we need to do is really be careful and get ahead of these pesticide problems before they begin impacting our very common species. Chimney swifts, for instance. Chimney swifts feed on flying insects like swallows do. Our chimney swift populations have declined all across North America. And we're looking at the reasons why chimney swifts are declining. Apparently, the insect populations that chimney swifts have depended upon for millennia have changed. If we do some boring into some of these chimney swift roosts, for instance, where the chimney swifts have been roosting for decades, and we mine the bottom of the chimney swift roost, we find that chimney swifts previously had been feeding on beetles. Now, over time, chimney swifts have adjusted their main food items to things like flies and other insects. So beetles apparently may have a better nutritional quality than the other flies and insects that chimney swifts are feeding on now. This all has evidence that's being affected by pesticides. Right from the beginning, many of our Connecticut birds are heavily impacted by pesticides. Bluebirds, for instance, you know, the bluebird that sits on your apple tree and dives down into the grass to feed on moths and other insects that it spots in the lawn are also impacted. Again, when we're losing our insect populations, we're losing our bird populations. So neonics not only affects directly the birds that are consuming seeds that are covered with neonics, but it's indirectly as well by reducing the insect population of birds and also birds that are feeding on insects that haven't been quite killed or have been killed by neonics are then affecting the birds. So lots of our birds, red-winged blackbirds, barn swallows, chimney swifts, bluebirds and robins are all common Connecticut birds that are being impacted by pesticides, including neonics. There's no question that this is an eye-opener that we need to get our arms around on really quickly. And I appreciate everybody that contributed so well to this publication that I think we have, for the first time in a long time, I think we've got a really good chance to do something about neonics in Connecticut. Back to you, Joyce.
Thanks, Smiley. So you've heard from our presenters. We're looking at USGS water testing, analyzing that data. Our partners at the Coalition for Pesticide Reform added some additional testing locations on rivers so we can determine how much is in the rivers. And the fact that it's been at chronic levels fairly consistently is disturbing to all of us. Here at Connecticut Audubon Society, we're partnering with the Vermont Center for Eco Studies on bee studies on one of our sanctuaries, which we're hoping to expand, including testing those bees, the native species of bees, for the pesticides that are in their systems. And together, we're all urging an immediate action against neonicotinoids. We're not pushing necessarily for a full ban on it. What we are asking for is more controls and monitoring, and for a reason for it, not for these chemicals to be used prophylactically, but being used when we know that there actually is a pest on the property and a risk to our crops and our environment. Just not being used as readily on lawns and golf courses, and controlling how much is being used in our state. We want Connecticut to remain a environmental legislative leader. That's why we love Connecticut so much. So the fact that Connecticut is behind on many of our neighboring states is disturbing. We'd like to be part of that coalition and have all of New England have some consistent policies on neonicotinoid use. Now, for our recommendations, we recommend that the state reduce the use of neonics, establishing stronger regulations, making Connecticut a healthier place for us to live, work, and play in, and healthier for all of our birds, bees, and wildlife. The new law should lead to a significant reduction in neonics on lawns and golf courses, and a decrease in the use on farms. The new law should improve public access to state data on neonic use. Transparency of data is so important for us to really understand, is it being used near our properties or next to us? And local governments can act on their own by banning pesticides on municipal lands. They can ban use of rodenticides too. And then for local governments and individuals, speak out. I urge you, join our advocacy alerts. If you've not done it already, we'll be sending out a link for you to register so that you can reach out to your legislators. Your voice, it really does magnify our impact. And together we can make all of this happen. I'm happy to see that we have a couple of representatives joining us today. We have Representative Gresco and Representative Kana joining us, and Representative Gresco has been participating in our issues on neonicotinoids. He's been very supportive of us. And I see that he actually has his hand raised. Representative Gresco, give me a second.
Thank you. Thank you all for taking the time today to participate in this. And I've been taking notes and questions, and if you will indulge me, I'd like to first of all say, give a shout out to my predecessor, Representative Richie Roy, who used to take this very seriously, and I was a staff member that assisted him in the past. So, you guys reminded me of him. So thank you again for doing this. And I don't know if you've heard, but I am not going to be the chairman of the Environment Committee in 2025. However, I will be guiding the committee kind of behind the scenes to go forward. I will be taking some bills out and the like, but I don't want everyone to lose their minds that I'm leaving and leaving you in a lurch kind of thing. I was drafted by the speaker to become a deputy speaker and do other things, but one of the caveats was to stay with my hands in environment. And so getting to the neonics topic, I have every intention of submitting a bill for next session. I just don't know if it's going to be the same one as last year. It sounds like we should shoot for the moon, go the Vermont model. And then if we have to scale back, we have to scale back. And instead of going about this in the same way that we normally do, I would suggest that we kind of change it up a little bit and possibly, I don't know who the Senate chair is going to be. You mentioned the Senate bills that were unsuccessful. It should be requested to have this bill be a Senate priority bill. In other words, they come out every session with 10 bills that are in different committees that are priorities. And I don't see this as being a problem with being a priority bill for the Senate. Why not the House? I'm going to have my hands full with we're going to reintroduce the climate bill. And I am going to reintroduce the rodenticides bill going forward. So it is going to be a busy year in environment, but I don't want you to lose momentum and lose faith. And one of the points that we're going to be monitoring is how financially we are going to be affected by what's happening in Washington. So it gives us that arguing point to say that we have to do something ourselves. And I'll tell you now that everyone on this call, the 110 of you, we're all preaching to the choir. You have me. You have Representative Khanna. You have Representative Hughes. You got us. It's the individuals that are on the fence can be educated and courted. No offense to my friend Representative Piscopo, who I've been friends with for decades. He's not voting for this. So let's not waste our time with people that we know we can't get on our side. That is a huge suggestion that has worked for me over the years. I could tell you right now that in past negotiations with the Department of Agriculture, they will not support not having seeds with neonicotinoids on them. That might have changed, but they're not supporting that. And I will find out when we have our meetings with them before session, but just to let you know the lay of the land and what you're dealing with, our own Department of Agriculture not a fan of having seeds without neonics.
Joe, we are so grateful. I'm so sorry to hear that you're not going to be the chair of environment, but being a deputy speaker is a great opportunity, and we love that you've been supporting us. We have a lot of questions in the chat that we do want to get our presenters to.
Sorry. Yeah.
And your recommendations we are taking them, and as a group, we are talking with Department of Agriculture, DEP, and we are making sure that we have we get all of our ducks in a line. And we look forward to talking with you further about that.
I just wanted to say thank you for the opportunity, and I'm not going anywhere.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, Tom, we do have a lot of questions. Can we bring back our presenters so that we can address them?
That would be good. Yeah, we have a lot. So let me start right in. Two questions right in a row from Sally Rogers, who I believe is from up in the Pomfret area. And I don't know if this would be for Emily or Dan or Hardy or whoever, but she asks, if neonics are banned, how long will it take for them to disappear from the environment? And also, if they're banned, what will farmers use to replace it?
So yeah, I can maybe the answer is it's complicated. So there's five main neonic chemicals that are used. They all have different half-lives. That's the amount of time it takes for half of the chemical to disappear in the environment. And some of the neonics, when they break down, they actually turn into other neonics. So thiamethoxam actually turns into clothianidin when it breaks down. So it's very complicated. We have to look to other jurisdictions that have prohibited neonics. And, because the half-lives are somewhere in the nature of a few years, you'd expect that maybe over a decade, you'd start to see them really cycle out of the ecosystem. But in Europe, where they prohibited them starting in 2013 and they expanded that ban in 2018, they're still finding neonics in all sorts of weird places, including the feathers of seabirds that eat fish that aren't in environments exposed to neonics. So it just goes to show they're very mobile in the environment. They get into a lot of weird different places, and they hang around longer than we think that they might normally. In terms of what farmers would use otherwise, I think the model that, as I understand it, that's been advanced in Connecticut and that's also been implemented in other states, in New York, Vermont, Quebec, they target the uses that provide no economic benefits to farmers. And these are the coatings on the corn, soybean, and wheat seeds. And actually, the bill in New York is so narrow, and in Vermont is so narrow, that they don't even affect other neonic uses on those crops. So you could spray a neonic on your soybean plants, for example. You'd only need to get that prescription, that permit for the coating on the corn and soybean seed. And they employed that in Quebec, right? Not necessarily a total ban, just get a prescription from your agronomist if you want to use that pesticide, show that you have a real need to use it. And what happened there is, neonic use in Quebec in 2015 looked like the United States, 100% of corn seed, 50% of soybean seed. The rules went into effect in 2019. By 2020, the use on corn seeds was less than 0.5%, and in soybean seeds, 0. And there has been no attributable cases of crop loss or switching to more harmful alternatives in Quebec. And again, Europe banned these seed coatings in 2013. They're still growing corn. They're still growing soybean. So it's really the heart of the problem with neonics is that we're using them wastefully. We're using them in scenarios where they're not providing any benefits. And a lot of that has to do with the monopoly or oligopoly power of these big seed and chemical companies, right? The folks that are making the seeds are the same ones that are making the pesticides that go on the seeds. And of course, they want to upsell you, right? It's just like at the car wash. They want to give you the hot wax and they want to charge for that. So, we don't need the hot wax, really. And it's damaging to the environment. It's polluting our water. It's getting into our bodies. It's threatening our health. These are the uses that are being targeted by these bills, which is why they're very surgical, but also really effective. Getting, just to give you a sense, the New York bill is going to get at about 80 to 90% of the neonic use in that state. So really smart, really targeted bills.
Terrific. So let me move to the next question. This is from Randy Friedman. She wants to know, how am I most likely to use these insecticides in my yard or those of my neighbors?
So as we talked about in 2016, Connecticut classified neonics as restricted use, which means they're not in your average home and garden consumer products like they might be in some other states. But they are available for use by certified applicators. So if you have someone coming and treating your lawn, let's say for grubs, or if you have someone, an arborist coming and treating your something or another for spotted lanternfly or emerald ash borer, that might be present in the injection for an ornamental tree, or it might be present in the grub treatment that's going onto a lawn, which could then end up in, if you have a pollinator bed next to your lawn, because these are systemic insecticides, it could end up in those plants adjacent to where you're getting a turf application. So they're not going to be on shelves, going to Home Depot, but they are present and available for applicators that you might be hiring in to use.
Thank you, Emily. Hardy, this question might be best for you. The question is, please comment on the loss of birds and insects in the Midwest where there are large amounts of corn and soybeans.
Very gladly, yeah. That is certainly where we see the biggest decline in grassland birds is in what is known as the corn belt or the breadbasket of the country. There is a lot of monoculture agriculture that happens. So corn, soybeans, wheat grown in huge amounts. We are seeing birds decline there really prominently for a couple of reasons. Number one is, of course, the land conversion. When we are taking habitat and turning it into agriculture, there's just fewer places for the birds to go and actually build habitat. But what's really interesting is that there's been a number of different studies that have looked at that fact and said, okay, if we're turning more land into agriculture, that's got to be bad for birds, right? And the answer is yes, it is, but it's not actually the most reliable predictor of bird declines. Pierre Minot, who has done fabulous work on the impact of insecticides on birds. I've worked with him. Dan's worked with him. I believe Emily's worked with him. He is an international name in terms of addressing this problem. He did a paper that documented in the Midwestern United States that if you wanted to find areas where birds were in decline, you shouldn't look at the areas where we have converted wildland into farmland. You should look at the areas where there's really heavy pesticide use. That is the best indicator of bird declines. That is the best predictor of where we're going to see bird losses. So yes, definitely converting habitat in an unsustainable way is not good for anything. I'm not at all advocating for that, but it's how we are treating that agricultural land, how we are growing those crops. Is this a very chemically intensive process, or are we cutting back on the chemicals we're using and only deploying them when we absolutely need them, such as if there's a novel pest outbreak or in the case of Quebec, like Dan was talking about, they started to look at, are we using insecticides because people said we should and because that's an easy solution, or are we using them because there's actually a need to? And when we start looking at the cases where we actually need to use neonics, there's a lot fewer opportunities for these chemicals to even be deployed. So we're definitely seeing big declines in grassland bird populations from a wide variety of things. But I think it's less that those areas are farms themselves and more it's about how we are farming that land, what chemicals we're using. And so take that and transfer it over to Connecticut. Yes, of course, taking a forest land or a native prairie or something like that and turning it into developed land is going to make it harder for wildlife. But it's more, how are we keeping the grass green on our golf courses? How are we treating the grubs in our yards? How are we farming the soils that we have? Is it in a more environmentally sustainable way, or is it very synthetic chemical dependent? And that's the big question that Connecticut Audubon and the CPR Coalition is addressing with the legislation.
Thank you, Hardy. So we said we were going to end at noon, and it's 10 after, and I can see that people are leaving. But I have one more quick question, and then turn it back to Joyce to say goodbye. And a fellow named James McDonald, this is something I'd never occurred to me. James says, this makes me think that I'm killing birds by feeding them birdseed at my bird feeder. Is birdseed contaminated? Is that a problem?
I'll jump in real quick and then see if anyone else wants to. The short answer is no, you are fine. You are fine in that regard. If you are taking seed and selling it for human or wildlife consumption, it is not allowed to have any pesticidal chemicals on it at all. So no, you are certainly not feeding poisoned seeds to the birds. And I'm happy to go into greater detail, but that's the bottom line.
The only addition I would have there is that when they treat a seed with the pesticide, they have to colorize it. They have to make it look like, these weird neon colors. They sort of look like toxic Skittles when you put them in the ground. So unless your seed looks really weird, sort of like these toxic Skittles, then you should be fine. And right, that's not approved for human or bird use.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, all four of you. Joyce, we'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. And thank you, Dan, Emily, Bill, and Hardy. Thank you so much for joining us. Your knowledge and your expertise in pesticides and preventing pesticide damage is really amazing. I want to thank everybody who joined us today. We will be sharing this presentation extensively, including on our website and emailing it to individuals. Several participants asked about ways that we could be sharing this with land trusts and other organizations. We are happy to do that. Just reach out to us, reach out to either me or to Tom. We're happy to make this available, but it will be on our website as well. This is a very important topic. Earlier in the year, several of us were going library to library, having conversations with different communities about what the impact was, and we're happy to do that again. So if you have a library that's interested, again, just reach out to us. The State of the Birds is going to be shared with our legislators. We thank Representative Gresco and Connor for joining us today. But as he indicated, that's kind of preaching to the choir. We really need to talk to those legislators that do have more concerns about this legislation and what the impact might be in Connecticut. We did say that we're not looking for a full ban. We're asking for proof of need. And that is all part of current legislative process and review process. It's just not being implemented right now. So we are looking to have that implemented. Your concern about the environment overall just really inspires us. It inspires us to continue doing what we're doing because we cannot do this alone. Your voice, your concerns, and your involvement is very critical. And on that note, I just want to thank you again and wish everybody a really nice day. Thank you.